Sup guys, Dragon 2020 here, and today we're to talk about the Wanderer Raiden Shogun fights. If you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. Anyways, let's get right into the video. Before we really get started with this video, we need to talk about the Traveler and their capabilities, or should I say lack thereof. One common thing that I constantly bring up when talking about the Knave fight, the Traveler has a chronic issue of not using his elements. There are only a select few times during the cutscenes where the Traveler has actually used the elements. This actually plays a massive role on how both of these fights turned out, and I'll address how they affected the fights when they come up. But another thing we need to talk about because of this chronic issue: Xingqiu, Kazuha, Nervalet, Yaimiko, Lisa, Tignari. All 6 of these characters are perfect examples of the following: power, technique, strategy. Nervalet and Yaimiko both have attacks that they can just dump out onto the battlefield and it'll do massive damage. Kazuha and Xingqiu, they both are swordsmen. They're both really skilled in their martial arts. And finally, Tignari and Lisa, these two have abilities that affect the enemy by using their elements. Sup guys, Future Dragon 2020 here. I had to make a new recording because I restructured the chart and I added a little bit more abilities and added multiples of the same abilities. Now that I'm actually looking at the Traveler's kit, he has a really nice kit. It's just the problem is he doesn't use any of it in the cutscenes besides gameplay. Like if you're looking at the chart, he has a ton of hacks abilities that can also work as like ultra powerful, and he should have a similar amount of techniques. Out of all of the ones that he had during the Raiden Shogun fight, he had Palm Vortex, Gust Surge, which both of them can function as ultra powerful and hacks. Starfell Sword and Wake of the Earth. Wake of the Earth is both a hack and an ultra powerful move. And when he got to Inazuma, he got Lightning Blade and Bellowing Thunder. Lightning Blade is a technique and Bellowing Thunder is a hacks. Even though he only has one element that he can use for elemental reactions, in terms of battle strategy for the cutscenes and stuff, he had actually a lot of options and a lot of defensive options that he just did not use. And if he did use these techniques, it was never shown that he did. So we're just left to assume that he just never used them in both the Wanderer and the Raiden Shogun fight. So the Traveler's use of his elements is just straight up abysmal. This will play a massive role in both of the fights. Let's quickly go over the Raiden Shogun. Makoto back in the day pretty much conceded that A was a better fighter than she was and was a better general as well. So much so that she sent A out in her place to fight major battles. On the wiki, it says that all sword techniques originated from the Raiden Shogun herself. Considering what I just said, the Raiden Shogun in question is A. The Musou no Hidetachi is the most legendary and most powerful sword technique in all of Teyvat. The only other Archon in game that we see is pretty good at martial arts is Zhongli. You could argue Mafuika, but she's more of a boxer slash brute force fighter with her claymore. And Zhongli is stated to be the progenitor of the adaptal arts and anything that has to do with magic, not martial arts. He's a good fighter and is a general, but there are no statements that talk about him in the same light as the Raiden Shogun in terms of martial arts, which leads me to believe that A is the best martial arts practitioner on the planet. When it comes to swordplay, the Traveler is pretty average, aside from the regular slashing, parrying, and stuff like that that all other characters in the game are capable of doing. So I want to put this into your mind real quick. So as I just talked about, the Traveler in terms of fighting technique when it comes to the elements is lacking. He seems to be average when it comes to fighting. He's just really powerful. So when you put someone on equal footing as him when it comes to speed and power, and they're just better at literally everything than him, how do you think a fight against that type of person would go? It wouldn't go well at all. So the Traveler pretty much got washed in the first fight, and the Raiden Shogun pretty much just styled on him. In this fight, we see the Traveler infuse their weapon with Electro, but we don't see any other element used in this scene. And that's important because at this point he has 2 other elements besides Electro. Before we move on, I had to go back and check Yaimiko's wording in regard to the Traveler's skill in comparison to the Raiden Shogun's. She said, and I quote, "How can I put this? You're no match for her at all." She literally goes on to say after that, "You don't think I would leave you with no chance at all, do you?" So she literally said to the Traveler, he stands no chance against the Raiden Shogun. And that was properly conveyed in the first fight. In the second fight, they pretty much went around as good as the first fight. The difference is the Traveler used the power of wishes to get a power-up. Not only did he get a power-up in this situation, but the Raiden Shogun received a debuff because at that moment everyone thought what she was doing was foolish and lost faith in her. This decreases an Archon's power immensely, seeing as this is mostly their source of power. In one occasion when I was talking about the Raiden Shogun fight, I said because Yamiko was there, the Raiden Shogun might have wanted to lose the fight. She hadn't seen Yamiko in hundreds of years, quite literally the last remaining closest friend she has left. So it makes 100% sense that she would want to speak to Yamiko. Now, to understand how bad this fight was, we have to talk about A fighting the Raiden Shogun. In Makoto's dimension, after the story boss fight, we see the Raiden Shogun employ a lot of electro constructs, controlling time, all of these abilities that were not used against the Traveler, which implies that she was holding back immensely against the Traveler. And the Traveler still lost the first time, and nearly lost the second time, and quite literally needed plot in order to win the second time. So Yamiko was accurate in what she said. The Traveler stood absolutely no chance against the Raiden Shogun, and only won because of plot and her plan. I really do want to stress how important it is that the Traveler only used Electro against the Raiden Shogun. Abe potentially was the best Electro user on the planet during the days when Makoto was still alive, and she had hundreds of years to perfect her art since then, versus the Traveler who only had this element for about a day. The experience gap between the two is quite insane, and the only advantage that the Traveler had at that point was the fact that he could control two other elements. Instead, he just used Electro even in the second fight. And then after that, he never uses those abilities that he uses against the Shogun ever again. And the only time we actually see him switch elements is later on in Fontaine. I am under the interpretation that the Traveler really doesn't like using the elements as much as he should. He mostly likes going in with raw brute strength and never really uses the elements whenever he needs to. Considering how old the Traveler twins are, potentially over 500 years old at the time of coming to Teyvat, they're probably used to just using hand-to-hand combat, so the Travelers just don't use the elements as they should. Alright, before we talk about the Wanderer fight, we need to talk about a couple things in regards to the scaling and how the fight went. So first off, let's just be honest, the Traveler and the Wanderer, they were relative to each other. I don't believe one was that much stronger than the other to the point where it was just a total stomp over and over 168 times. What I believe happened is the Wanderer's size and biology, or lack thereof, played a massive role in the fight. The Wanderer is hundreds of times bigger than the Traveler and is a puppet and does not get tired just like the Raiden Shogun. After all, he is the prototype for the Raiden Shogun. I really want to stress how important the Wanderer's size in comparison to the Traveler's was. Even though the Traveler and the Wanderer in terms of power were equals, the Traveler's attacks took more time to reach the Wanderer and made it harder for the Traveler to capitalize on anything. In fact, the reason why the Traveler lost in the last loop was because of the size difference. So the Wanderer's size did actually impact the fight and was probably the reason why he lost 168 times. When you combine both with the fact that he can teleport all across the ring and has more mobility than the Traveler, this can easily lead to the Traveler getting exhausted and the Wanderer getting in a lucky hit. And wouldn't you know, that's exactly what happened the 168th time. The Wanderer mixed the Traveler and then one-shot him. So the Wanderer, he had access to 4 different elements. He had access to Animo, Pyro, Cryo, and Electro, with Electro being the strongest element, and Animo being the second strongest. Another thing that contributed to the Traveler's loss is the fact that the Wanderer seemed to like using a bunch of ranged options rather than finding the Traveler with just bare hands. He also did a ton of swooping attacks, littering the ground with Pyro and Cryo. It's almost as if the Wanderer was trying to tire the Traveler rather than trying to outmuscle the Traveler, which is what I believe happened during this fight, which led to the Traveler's loss. After all, he wasn't overpowered and in one shot. He was mixed and then one shot. Afterwards, Nahida steps in, she gets clapped, literally. The Wanderer tries to take Analisis, realizes he's in an Akasha loop, and now the Traveler is fighting the Wanderer with all the knowledge on how the Wanderer fights, plus having the power of wishes act. Nahida proceeds to give him a device that is powered by her. That device is capable of taking chunks off of the Wanderer's mech, and even staggering it while it's trying to use its ultimate move, to the point where it takes several minutes for him to get back up, and the Traveler proceeds to beat the Wanderer pretty badly. In fact, the mech completely falls apart. This loss was so bad, the Wanderer loses the will to fight, and just falls to the ground. Moving on to the second time the Wanderer and the Traveler fought, this fight was pretty open and shut. In fact, the Traveler seemed to have significant gains, as mentioned in my Mafuika video, to the point where he could sidestep the attack that was going to one-shot him again, this time with his eyes closed. The difference is his back was turned, so he didn't see the attack when it was initially launched, which almost led to him losing. That was a mistake, not an inability. This has nothing to do with his speed and power. In fact, it highlighted how much more faster and more powerful the Traveler got. After the Wanderer gained his vision, the two proceeded to beat the mech, and then the story concluded. Before I move on to the analysis part of the video, I need to say this. The second time the Wanderer and the Traveler fought, it was when the mech fighting with the upper half, not the entire body. So technically, the mech wasn't even at full power when they beat it, and wasn't doing what it was when the Traveler fought it the first time. And based off of some of the interactions the Traveler had with this mech, it actually showcased the Traveler being more powerful than the mech in some regards. He just was tiny and suffered from range issues. The gap between the Raiden Shogun and the Traveler is just absolutely massive when you really think about it like this. She performed the exact same feat of closing her eyes and no diffing her opponent's attack as the Traveler did with the Wanderer's laser. He did this after acquiring the power of wishes and knowledge of how the Wanderer fought, somewhat implying that the Raiden Shogun read him like a book and then just no-diffed his attack. In fact, it was way worse because she didn't even move an inch. She just closed her eyes and just teleported them into the plane of environment. At least this is a 5 to 10 times difference, and I'm leaning more towards 10 times and higher. Honestly, the Wanderer was a better matchup for the Traveler than the Shogun was. The Shogun is the best martial arts practitioner on the entire planet versus the Wanderer, who is trying to seize power, and once he achieved it, he never actually tried to mold it into anything else. This is actually important because Yae Miko was specifically training the Traveler to fight against the Shogun's skill, not necessarily her power. In both fights, the power of wishes was used. However, the amp received against the Wanderer was more powerful than the amp the Traveler received against the Shogun. The Shogun was nerfed because in the moment that the Traveler received the power of wishes, everyone lost faith in A, and that decreased her Archon powers. That didn't really happen with the Wanderer. He only had one follower. In Sumeru, Nahida pretty much hooked them up to the entire nation, and they all collectively provided information along with their support in order to defeat the Wanderer. So the pool in comparison is extremely vast and has a higher population. So in Sumeru, the Traveler had more energy to draw from, a better matchup, and a weapon that could take chunks off of the Wanderer's mech, assisting him in the fight, and an overall more satisfying outcome than in Inazuma. Alright guys, that's gonna do it. The main purpose of this video is to provide some context behind the fights, to give some better insight for power scaling reasons and for curiosity, if that's what you came here for. If you like this type of content, please like and subscribe, and as always, have a wonderful day.